Hey, this is Blondeguygamer and welcome to the next part of my North American Tales of Retrospective. If this is your first time watching, just keep these rules in mind before commenting. Alright, so today's game is the third entry in this series, Tales of Eternia. Now you might be wondering why this says Tales of Destiny 2 instead. Well, buckle up because it's explanation time. You see, Tales of Eternia was renamed Destiny 2 when it was localized and published here by Namco Hometech, the US division of Namco that also brought us Tales of Destiny. It was speculated that the name was changed to avoid copyright infringement from the Eternia Masters of the Universe toy line from Mattel, but in actuality it was renamed to establish a clearer series connection since Eternia is the second Tales game we got after Destiny. Besides, renaming JRPGs for North America is something we did see quite a bit before. Though in the long run, all it did was cause confusion, as Eternia is not a direct sequel to Destiny because most entries are their own separate stories with different worlds and characters. And hindsight wasn't in Namco Hometech's favor, as the next Tales game was in fact the actual sequel to Tales of Destiny, which while only came out in Japan, made things even more confusing. But let's get this straight. Tales of Destiny 2 with the Roman numeral 2 is the North American version of Tales of Eternia, while the one with the normal number 2 on the PlayStation 2 in Japan is the official sequel to Destiny. So because of that, I'm just going to refer to this game as Tales of Eternia for this video. Anyway, with that taken care of, we can now talk about the game on hand. Made and published again by Wolf Team and Namco, Tales of Eternia is a late PlayStation 1 game, coming out in North America on September 10th, 2001, almost 3 years after Tales of Destiny. And like Destiny, it took just over 9 months to localize after the Japanese release as well. Tales of Eternia also opens with an anime intro by Production IG, and the similarities don't end there, as the intro music is another orchestrated piece made to replace the original version's J-pop song, which in this case was Flying by Garnet Crow, but still the same quality animation nevertheless. The game starts off with another animated cutscene of a foreshadowing conversation between two people in a foreign language and the girl entering a spaceship-like vessel. We then cut to our main protagonist Reed Herschel visiting his friend Fair Orsted at a watchtower on the outskirts of their home farm town of Rasheen's. The first thing that may surprise you is that this game does have voice-acted scenes, in English no less, making this the first Tales game with English voice acting. As for the actual quality of the voice acting, I'll get into that later after I explain more of the game. Reed and Farah soon see something fall from the sky and nearly crashes them, which turns out to be the mysterious girl in the vessel from the intro cutscene. Unfortunately, they can't understand her, but decide to help the strange girl anyway. Despite the lack of communication, we do find out the girl's name is Meredy, and the group decides to visit Kiel Zabel, a childhood friend of Reed and Farah's, for further help. And they soon realize that the world of Eternia is in danger in typical RPG fashion. Eternia is actually two planets right next to each other, Inferia, the one we start off in, and Celestia, the planet Meredy is from, though they haven't been in contact for 2,000 years prior. It turns out a dark matter is forming in the orbis barrier that is in between the worlds and is pulling the planets together, causing a potential calamity called the Grand Fall. In order to try and stop that, the party will have to get the power of the greater Kremels, which are elemental spirits from both worlds. The gameplay of Eternia remains familiar to the series, but a fair amount of changes were made and introduced since Tales of Destiny. Instead of a traditional top-down view in towns and dungeons, Eternia uses an isometric angle. But because this is still technically a 2D game, movement can seem a bit stiff compared to later entries. Though if you're used to other isometric role-playing games like Super Mario RPG, then it won't be much of a problem. You can use either the PlayStation D-pad or analog stick for movement, but the latter is pretty loose compared to the D-pad. The rest of the controls are fine though, even having the X button being confirm and circle for cancel this time around like most PlayStation games we're used to. The game is mostly sprite-based, but the overworld is once again 3D. Only this time you can rotate the camera with the R1 and L1 buttons, making seeing where you need to go easier. It's made even more so by being able to press select and a character portrait will pop up and tell you where you need to go. These are also fully voiced in English, and it's the first time we have the series skits, even though we only got the navigational ones in Eternia. In the Japanese version, conversations with characters could be triggered by using a tent item that can be used on the world map from a travel menu. But in the North American release, tents remain to something that can use as much as you want on the overworlds, though it only restores HP and conversations aren't triggered. It is a bit of a shame the majority of these were cut, but the fact that everything else is voiced in English is still a bigger effort than not having it at all like in Tales of Destiny. As for the battle system, now the aggressive linear motion battle system, it's still on a two-dimensional plane, but is much faster than Destiny's. Fights are still triggered mostly at random, with only a few exceptions to see in approaching enemies. You can now attack with basic 2 or 3 hit combos with normal attacks in addition to the special skills. Initially, you can assign 4 special attacks to the person you control, but can also shortcut 2 more abilities from anyone in the party with the R2 and L2 buttons during fights. Skills and spells, however, aren't just required by simply leveling up. With melee-focused characters like Reed and Farah, they have 2 meters to build, which are slash and thrust and punch and kick respectively. Raising those meters with attacks and using associated skills will unlock new powerful ones to use. Advanced spells that magic casters, or Kraymel users like Meridian Keel in this case, have to be learned from the Greater Kraymels infringing their cages that hold them. You give the Greater Kraymels to either character to use, and they level up and allow the assigned characters to use their spells. However, in order to learn more spells, fringing combines separate Kraymels between the two cages, and all the Kraymels have unique spells and abilities depending on which ones are fringed. It does seem a little complicated at first, but it's a unique system that allows pretty customizable spell arrangements. And all the spells this time around are cast in real time during the battles, so no more interruptions during them, with the exception of summoning the Greater Kraymels themselves, which are undoubtedly the most powerful abilities at your disposal. In order to do so, the more the associated element of spell the character uses, a gauge will slowly build up, and when that's full, the Greater Kraymel can be summoned into battle. The gauges can also be filled by giving the Kraymels crystal pieces of their element, but keep in mind fringing averages the meters between them all. Now, in Tales of Destiny and some of the other games, you can summon these spirits too, albeit slightly different iterations, not unlike the summon spirits in Final Fantasy, although in Destiny it was just through rare items and weren't crucial to the story. So in that regard, I feel Tales of Eternia is the proper introduction to the summon spirits for us, as you have to fight them to prove your worth and are rewarded by doing so, rather than just be from an item you may not even find, not to mention Udini being properly translated this time. And there are even optional Greater Kraymels you can find to build up your arsenal even further. Strategy is still a significant part of the combat, as ally formation and individual traits can be adjusted accordingly. There's also commands you can issue during battles, which you can find more of in hidden areas on the world maps. The default AI of your teammates is competent enough to not need to micromanage strategy too much, though reversing the party order with L1 is still pretty essential, as some enemies and bosses can attack from either side fairly frequently. Also, pressing down while holding L1 will gather the party back into formation, which can also be helpful to ensure your party's survival. And because the battles are faster paced compared to Tales of Destiny and Fantasia, it can get a little overwhelming at first, especially when multiple enemies can drain your health very quickly if you're caught off guard. And staying with targeted enemies can be a detriment since they can go all over the place, so switching targets with R1 is recommended and is handled better than in Destiny. Once you do get the feel for it, the fighting is satisfying and quite rewarding to get high combos. It is one of, if not the best 2D battle system in the series that we've gotten. Oh, and remember how in Tales of Destiny multiplayer was introduced, but only through an item that you had to equip on other characters? Well, Tales of Eternia has multiplayer right from the get-go, making this a proper feature now. Up to 3 players can join in the battles, and you can even switch between the characters and assign their skills freely. The only problem with multiplayer is that the camera tends to focus on player 1, so others may lose themselves off screen. Just be aware of that if you do play this game with people. Another thing you have to be aware of is if you do die, you actually have 2 choices. You can either load from when you last saved or retry. Saving is something you can actually do at any time anywhere, and instead of save points, you have load points that act as checkpoints in dungeons whenever you reload. If you hit retry, you'll respawn in the beginning of the area or by low points as well, but the cost of half your gold and only having a quarter of the party's health. But as long as you save frequently and just reload instead, there is no need to retry. I find it odd Eternia has an option like this when I don't think any other Tales games had this. Fortunately, the rest of the game stays true, as the areas are nicely diversified, with the main dungeons of the Greater Kraymels having respected obstacles of their elements to contend with, while others still have something of their own nature that make them unique from each other. Later on you get the Sorcerer's Ring, and it functions much like it did in Tales of Destiny, minus having to use Lens to activate it. And in addition to that, you get a freeze ring that does the opposite. The only thing I didn't like with the area puzzles is moving objects around. It was something I wasn't too keen on in Tales of Destiny, but more so the fact things you could grab were often vague. In Eternia, it's easier to know what to do, but with the isometric angle and movement, the controls for grabbing and moving these can be cumbersome when you have to move them in 8 directions, and these can easily get stuck on anything it contacts. Luckily, these are fewer and far between, but they can still be a pain in the ass. Object puzzles aside, the world or worlds of Eternia are still fun to explore. You're even given some freedom fairly early on in Inferia when you acquire the area board ability from the Wind Kraymel Sylph. In Celestia, however, you gain access to the legendary pirate ship Van Altea, and let me tell you, you will get attached to it during the game. Not only is it a boat to travel the oceans freely and can recall from any time from the shores, but later on you upgrade to include the Eyefish submarines, which you do use to travel across the ocean floors with and to find even more areas beneath the seas. It can also eventually travel between Inferia and Celestia, gets a Kraymel cannon added for firepower, have empty rooms customized into things like inns and stores, though it's really expensive to do so, and can even be upgraded further near the end of the game with more rooms and the Eyebird vehicles for full flight around the worlds. In short, the Van Altea is awesome, and is one of the best ships in an RPG I've played. Outside of the Van Altea, there is still a good amount of things to do and find in towns. Equipment and buying items is still more or less the same, and being thorough rewards you with hidden lens that are scattered around the game, which are not only a nod towards Tales of Destiny, but can get special items for every 10 you find from Eileen, who was also a supporting character from Destiny. In addition to Lens, you can also find the self-proclaimed mysterious Wonder Chef, who makes his series debut here. He's usually hiding as out-of-place objects in buildings, and when you do find them, you'll learn a recipe and are given ingredients to cook it with. I can't help but wonder though, why disguise or hide yourself only to give recipes and food when found and do so multiple times? If he does want to spread the joy of cooking, why go through these lengths? Is there something darker behind this? Or am I overthinking a silly character in a JRPG? Probably the latter, but I'm still gonna keep an eye on you, Wonder Chef. Anyway, cooking is another series staple that is introduced to us in Tales of Eternia, even though it technically debuted in the PlayStation version of Fantasia that came out after Tales of Destiny, but that was only in Japan. Cooking is done by selecting a dish and a character to make it. Certain people are more adept at cooking specific dishes than others, but anyone can make them that can restore various amounts of health and TP, and even temporary boost stats when successfully made. Otherwise, not so much. But the more you cook with one character on a dish, the more they will master it and not likely fail. Cooking dishes can even be set automatically to be made after battles, adding even more depth to the gameplay systems. It's a vast improvement from the food sack in Destiny and can be a resourceful recovery option. With the gist of the game explained, let's talk about the playable characters themselves finally. There's actually less people that join the party this time than in Tales of Destiny, but are still worth mentioning. There's our protagonist Reed, who is a hunter and attacks with swords, axes, and spears, so he's obviously the frontrunner in fights. And yes, I said he in case you thought otherwise. I didn't think he looked that stereotypically androgynous, but since a couple of my friends actually mistook him as a girl at first glance, others may do the same. I guess looking like he has eyeliner on the cover and the clothes he wore didn't help, especially the top he wears. Though if anything, it actually reminds me of the clothes Monster Hunters wear under their armor from those games instead, which would make more sense in that regard. Once you confirm his gender, he is another standard main JRPG character, though less eager than Stan from Tales of Destiny as he just wants a more simple and easygoing life. He does become more willing once the stakes are high enough to the point where he has to go through trials to learn moves called Aura Arts late in the game. These are activated by pressing the block, attack, and special skill buttons at the same time once Reed's health starts flashing. This drains the rest of his health to 1, so it is a little risky, but quite powerful. However, you only get 3 arts, with the first creating a blast with a 3-button press, the second by pressing attack rapidly after the first activation, and the final is just similar to the first to stop the final boss's instant kill move. But even without those, Reed is still a good character to play as. Other characters include Farah, who specializes in martial arts and healing powers. She is the opposite of Reed in terms of personality, completely selfless and willing to help immediately, which can often lead to trouble due to her impulsiveness. Merity is the celestial Cramel user, and while the party doesn't understand her at first, they do acquire Aura's earrings that allow them to communicate. She is also accompanied by a creature called Quickie, who Merity uses in battle as her normal attacks. She basically sicks it on enemies, and I like to think it goes like this. Quickie, use quick attack! Pikachu, I mean Quickie! Yeah, and not only does this thing look like a Pokemon, but it actually does cry out its name like one.
Quickie! 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 Quickie!
Ah! He won't shut up! Make it stop! Make it stop! Okay, in all seriousness, while Quickie is a possibly inspired Pokemon knockoff, he isn't that grating. And neither is Merity, as she has a childlike demeanor, but is cheerful and endearing. Keel, on the other hand, is a university student studying the inferior Cramels, essentially the intellectual type, willing to go through great lengths to seek the truth, yet doesn't have a lot of stamina and tires easily. He is still a powerful mage with the Cramels given to him. Then there's Ras, a swordsman claiming to be a merchant who's only in the party for a short time, so he's more of a story-important character. Chat, a young pirate girl, is the owner of the Van Altia, which was inherited to her from her great-grandfather Airfried, a pirate that is also mentioned in a few of the other Tales games, but has the biggest role in Eternia. Chat is actually an optional character of sorts, only joining the party when asked to. In fights, she attacks with a handbag, yes really, and hammer attacks. Also, in order to gain more hammer skills, you'll need to find pirate statues hidden around with Chat in your party. On top of that, she's also the only party member that can perform a counterattack. Lastly, there's Max, a leader of resistance groups who attacks primarily with a large cannon gun that shoots slow, but powerful blasts that can also change slightly depending on the button pressed after. He's the brute force character of the group, and like Chad, additional skills can be found around the world, which in his case are from a Pygmaeus, a special type of a cat-like creature that, shall we say, simulates Max's mind to learn more moves. While Max is mandatory in the party for one dungeon in the game, he is also mostly an optional member to have. Although an issue from Tales of Destiny that was fixed is that people rejoin later will be at the same level as you, and since there's a maximum of 6 people in your party anyway, you don't have to worry about swapping party members. Hell, even in moments when people leave the party briefly, you keep their equipment, which is a nice thought. Now, at first I was a little disappointed that Tales of Eternia has seemingly less significant main characters, with Chat and Max feeling more like supporting characters that don't have to join the fights, and Raz being in the party for such a brief time that he doesn't doesn't really count as a member. But then I realized the game focuses more on the 4 main characters of Reed, Farah, Merity, and Keel, bringing stronger character development between them because of that. It's a trade-off that I say works in Eternia's story favor. And that's not to say the rest of the story isn't good either. While a little predictable if you know the gist of Tales' narratives, it still has its share of plot twists and balance of serious and humorous moments the series is known for. That and doing a good job showcasing the contrast between the traditional world of Inferior and the more desolate but technologically advanced world of Celestia. Tales of Eternia takes about as much time to go through as Destiny did, at roughly 40 hours. Only this time the game is actually on 3 discs, the most any Tales game ever had. And there are plenty of side quests and activities, with a few of them being quite rewarding, but most are just diversions from the main game, the mini-games in particular. Some of them are actually required to play through at least once during the game, but others are just there if you want to play them. And there are a ton of them. In fact, Eternia kinda goes a little overboard with them, to the point where there's even a card game called Wiz suddenly introduced at one point.
RPG card game!
Okay, yeah, it does seem obligatory in the wake of Final Fantasy 8 and 9's card games, but this one is actually pretty simple to get into. It plays like Uno or Crazy 8s in that you match colors and have special cards to change the color and whatnot. Plus, it's something that you can just play at any time afterwards with your party for fun. However, that's the thing with having this many minigames, they're not much else besides quick diversions. Most just give you a title if you complete them, which is another feature first used in this game. Through completing things like minigames or even just story progression, characters earn titles that you can change from their status screens. These don't do anything, at least in Eternia, so they're more like achievements of sorts. But that's pretty much what you get for actually completing the mini-games, and sometimes you don't even get a title until you do something like complete it under a specific time and you waste time to beat it only to not even get a title because of that. Stupid boat racing minigame. Other side quests and activities aren't as frustrating, but still not really rewarding. Some give you items which don't seem to do anything that I guess are mementos for completing them. Regardless, there are still a few more side activities worth mentioning. There's quiz exams about other Namco games and Tales of Destiny, and 3 difficulty sets by Chelsea and Clement from Destiny, and even Claude from Tales of Fantasia. Or rather, Clark according to this game. Yeah, and that's actually not the worst mistranslation. You can also find Bruiser Kang and challenge him in a sushi eating minigame, who is named Kong the Man. Okay, how did they mistranslate that when he was from Tales of Destiny? Did they forget that? Although to be fair, the rest of the translation of this game is still fine as far as PlayStation RPGs go. Another cameo I want to mention is that after you complete the arena battles, Crest from Tales of Fantasia actually comes out to challenge you. And I sorta lost because he's really tough. Thankfully, you can always re-challenge him, but I think showing he is in this game as the final arena boss is enough for me for now. And if that wasn't enough, on the hard battle difficulty, Crest will be accompanied by Ark for the fight in case you want even more of a challenge. Needless to say, going for total completion in Tales of Eternia can be an ordeal, and there isn't much incentive to do so. Though there is one reward for completing a side quest that lets you summon Tales of Destiny characters, but only once every half hour during play sessions to prevent abusing it. And there is a few things you do unlock for starting a new game on a cleared file, almost like a New Game Plus. It's mostly just an even harder battle difficulty option and access to the voice clips in the sound test, where you can see how much the originals were cut in this. There is a bonus dungeon too, but you need to play the game near the end again, or you can simply overwrite another file that takes place before the final boss since clear game data carries over to those. It can still be a pretty ruthless extra dungeon, as you play a different character one at a time on each floor of a maze with pretty tough enemy encounters. I also didn't go through this dungeon for now, but did want to at least mention it for the sake of extra content after beating the game, even if not a whole lot. Those nitpicks aside, Tales of Eternia is still a good JRPG and has a lot of advancements over Destiny, such as the graphics. The sprite work is even more nicely detailed, and the character designs done by Masumi Inomata as well are now more evenly proportioned compared to the chibi style from Tales of Destiny. The 3D graphics of the overworlds and such are more profound here, but are still used just sparingly enough so it can hold up decently well along with the 2D art. There's even a few CG cutscenes, mostly the Van Altea, that complement the visual presentation as well. As for the sound, the music is once again composed by Motoi Sakuruba and Shinji Tomura, and is another good soundtrack for the series that I say is better than Destiny, at least in terms of variation, as it goes from serene melodies like the one in the Tree Top Village of Moral, to the more jaunty tunes such as the Train Town Barol, to the intensity of the Fire Great Kramos Domain, Ifrit Gorge. And And that's just the range in Eternia, as the composers did do a good job giving Celestia's areas its own distinct style as well, complete with their own battle and overworld themes. One fault I could give to the sound design is that whenever Reed uses his Aurora arts, the battle music will get louder, which I'm guessing is intentional to make them more epic, but it's unnecessary when it stays that loud after the Aurora move for the rest of the fight. As for the voiceovers, it's what you might expect for something on the PlayStation, but they actually aren't that bad, at least for the time. And there are still dialogue scenes with no voices, but the scenes in which characters do actually talk are done just often enough to make them significant. There is genuine effort with the acting, and it never goes too cheesy or over the top. Well, with the exception of this guy.
So, you are Merity's companions. Welcome to the party. You will soon be destroyed.
Voices like that have aged a little to where it can sound like an early English dub of an anime, but in all honesty, the only voice that irked me slightly was Reed's, as he sounds a little too crackly teen for my taste. I mean, I know the main characters are teenagers and that's what the actors seem to be going for, but Reed often sounds like he's still going through puberty.
If you are prepared, Keel, what does she mean?
Funny enough, Reed is actually voiced by Kevin Miller, who is more known for his role as Sly Cooper. Sadly, this was the only English voice actor I could find info on, as the only credit for English voices in the game is recording from Webtone Productions. I wish I could find out who the other voice actors were, because I think they did do a good job for being the first game in this series with English talking, though some of the voice clips seem to cut off at the end, but that seemed to be the only real technical issue. There is also something, albeit more so the dialogue than the actual voice acting, I like to call the Tales of Eternia catchphrase drinking game. Basically, take a shot every time you hear or see the following. Farah going, "No problem."
No problem. No problem. No problem?
Merity saying, "You bet."
You bet. You bet. You bet.
And lastly, Max when he says, "Yeah." But considering practically half his dialogue is that, I wouldn't recommend that one with alcohol at that point. So instead, here's this.
Yeah.
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 Yeah. Yeah.
Enrico!
Joking aside, Tales of Eternia is another solid early entry in the series I enjoyed playing to the end, as it brought more features and improvements to the exploration, combat, and presentation. It's what I consider a transitional entry in the series between the 2D and 3D Tales games. I do recommend this to Tales and JRPG fans, but like Tales of Destiny, it's difficult to get a copy. The game came out in 2001, a very busy year in gaming, with most people focusing on the PlayStation 2 and the upcoming Xbox and GameCube, so it's not a surprise games from those systems overshadowed this one. In fact, Tales of Eternia came out just 2 weeks before Silent Hill 2, though it's not as bad as Tales of Destiny being released around the same time as Fallout 2 and Pokemon Red and Blue. Eternia actually didn't sell quite as much as Destiny, but still sold over 800,000 units worldwide, though the vast majority of that naturally was in Japan, even being popular enough to warrant an OVA anime by Production IG and Xebec and an MMO-style game called Tales of Eternia Online, which only lasted about a year. In North America, it didn't even come close to reaching those levels, selling even less than Tales of Destiny. What with it coming out as late as it did on the PlayStation, not unlike Dragon Quest VII, or Warrior at the time, that also came out later that year. And some reviews, while mostly positive, felt the game still looked antiquated with the reliance on 2D graphics despite the improved visuals. As a result, the game is even rarer than Destiny and is usually more expensive. I've seen it go for around $150. Now, unlike Tales of Destiny, I didn't luck out and found this for $10 or something like that. It was actually a Christmas gift I got from a friend a few years back.
You'll have to forgive me for being a little sentimental, but if not for that means for covering this game and even starting the retrospective at all wouldn't have started as soon as it did. I am still very thankful for getting this game at all, and the least I could do is share this with my home viewer base because it's one of the more lesser played Tales games here in North America.
By the way, Namco, Konami released Suikoden 2 on the PlayStation Network not too long ago. It is also a rare and expensive PlayStation JRPG that is now rarely available as a download. Think you could do the same for Tales of Eternia? Or even Tales of Destiny? Seriously, these are the hardest Tales games to come by, and PSN releases would be a dream come true so people can easily play them and still support the series at the same time.
But in the meantime, there is another way to get Tales of Eternia, more specifically the PSP version, that we actually didn't get, but Europe surprisingly did.
This is pretty much a straight up port, and while the original PlayStation version didn't come to Europe like Destiny, which makes me question why there's European figures in the sales charts I found, Ubisoft did publish the game for that region in 2006. The PAL version has the English translation, complete with the voice work. And because the PSP is region free, you can import it off of online sellers from places like the UK and play the game that way. Copies can go around for $40 or $50, but it's still a much cheaper alternative. Hell, you can probably get the game and a used PSP for less than a North American PlayStation copy. So because realizes that Tales of Eternia is a little more accessible than Tales of Destiny, but I can't stress enough how much they should both be PSN downloads. Until that hopeful day, be prepared to pay quite a bit or import the PAL PSP version if you want to get it for yourself.
It may seem like a bummer the first two Tales games we got were overlooked, but the next game would prove that there is a market for this series over here. It became, and still is, the most popular entry and the first for many people that played any of the series, myself included. In the next part of the retrospective, we'll take a look at Tales Symphonia for the GameCube. It'll be nice to talk about a game people actually know for once.